We are who we choose to be. Now choose!
Beneath all the popcorn action, colorful costumes, and campy comedy lies a powerful character study. Sam Raimi Spider-Man is about change, power, and a choice that needs to be made between desire and responsibility. The way the film delivers that message is through the relationship between Peter Parker and Norman Osborn. Both characters are gifted with great power, and for a time, they both abuse it. So, how does Peter go from a punk blowing off his loved ones to a true hero in one of the greatest superhero movies ever made?
These are the years when a man changes into the man he's going to become the rest of his life. Just be careful who you change into.
Let's examine the hero's journey of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. We should begin by taking a look at what kind of person Peter was becoming in the events leading up to Uncle Ben's death. The plot of Spider-Man picks up with Peter's class going on a field trip. Several scenes before Uncle Ben or Aunt May are introduced to the audience, Peter and Norman meet for the first time, and it is established right away that they are a mismatched father and son. Norman isn't thrilled with the kind of person his real son has turned out to be, and sees something in Peter, already calling out their similarities in the now memed-to-death statement,
"I'm something of a scientist myself."
Following this quick exchange, Harry jokes that he thinks Norman wants to adopt Peter. The next step in their respective journeys is the acquisition of their superhuman abilities. Peter is bitten by that darn sneaky radioactive spider, while Norman subjects himself to his own experimentation to ensure his corporation doesn't lose a valuable contract. Although we don't spend too much time with Norman before his transformation into the Green Goblin, he seems to genuinely believe in the scientific pursuit of his company, so much so that he is willing to put his own life on the line. It isn't much, but I believe this was meant to show us that Norman wasn't an evil man before he got into that chamber. He may not have been a stellar father, but there were redeeming aspects of his personality. That quickly falls away once he acquires his powers. His first act as the Goblin is to lash out at his employee over a surface-level grudge established in a prior scene. Any restraint that Norman once had is gone. Similarly, when Peter first realizes that he has powers, he lashes out at someone he feels bitter toward. To caveat this, Flash is trying to attack Peter, so it isn't the same situation, but it's clear that after Peter established control over the situation, he could have ended things more calmly on his own terms. Instead, he succumbs to his impulsive desire and delivers a strong punch to Flash's chest. In the moment, this feels like a small victory, and Peter relishes in his power. Between Peter's realization of his new abilities through to his confrontation with the man he believes to have killed Uncle Ben, we are shown increasing displays of Peter's shift towards selfishness. He breaks a promise to Uncle Ben, since, like all teenage boys, he started experimenting with his body and goo. His first foray into superhero-dom comes from wanting to impress Mary Jane with a new car. Aunt May and Uncle Ben complain that Peter is behaving differently. He's begun shirking his responsibilities around the house. When Uncle Ben tries to talk to Peter about this, Peter tries to blow him off, but when Uncle Ben continues, Peter interrupts him several times, injecting his own ego into the conversation. He isn't absorbing the lessons that Uncle Ben is trying to teach him, about power coming with responsibility, about choice, and about change. Peter's new sense of his super self even shines through in his goofy costume at the wrestling match. When the announcer introduces Peter for the first time, he refuses to step out.
No, he got my name wrong.
He's become so focused on himself that he even gets upset the announcer made his dumb wrestler name much better. Of course, the final nail in the coffin for Peter's increasingly impulsive and self-centered behavior comes with his refusal to stop the robber.
I missed the part where that's my problem.
Very quickly, we all see how it was Peter's problem. But his character shift doesn't come immediately upon Uncle Ben's death. His reaction is still driven by selfish impulse. His first action is not to call Aunt May or rush home to be there for her. Instead, he leaps into the police's pursuit, trying to catch the killer himself, to take his rage out and make himself feel better. Peter beats the man brutally, ready to kill him in revenge. It isn't until he sees it's the robber he let go that he realizes if he had acted responsibly instead of selfishly, he could have prevented Uncle Ben from dying. This moment is the birth of Spider-Man. To contrast this positive change in Peter's personality, in the next scene of the film, Norman attacks his competition and those in control of the contract, killing them all while laughing. Norman's initial outburst after the experiment was not a one-off. He's chosen impulse and selfishness. It's no coincidence that this comes right after Peter's shift toward a new path. Had Uncle Ben's death not happened, Peter could have ended up similar to the Goblin, using his power only to benefit himself without care for others. In the very next scene, Peter and Norman interact for the second time, and once again their father and son relationship is solidified. Norman tells Peter that he thinks of him as Harry's brother, offering to help him any way that he can. The two don't realize it yet, but they are now on a collision course because of the choices they have made since the first time they met. Following graduation, Peter dons the red and blue spandex for the first time, and we get a montage of New Yorkers reacting to their new friendly neighborhood hero. Not everyone is pleased with Spider-Man though. None more so than J. Jonah Jameson, who is introduced with a declaration that Spider-Man is a menace. JJ represents the internal conflict for Peter at the heart of this act of the story. Is doing the right thing worth it if you don't get appreciated? It's here that the movie focuses in on Peter and Mary Jane reconnecting after high school, Peter getting acclimated to his life in Manhattan with Harry, and Peter taking photos of himself for money. For Jameson. He's wearing clothes though. Form-fitting spandex. Going on in the background of this boss bitch behavior, Norman's life is going great. He has blown away the competition, literally, and has a pep in his step about the contract that Oscorp has scored. Things are going so well that Oscorp is getting bought, and they're removing Norman as CEO as part of the deal. Does Norman take the time to reflect on his selfish impulses backfiring on him? Of course not. He doubles down.
I started this company. You know how much I sacrificed?
Naturally, Norman suits up and takes his frustrations out on the board, knowingly endangering the life of his own son in order to get revenge. The Green Goblin persona is all about indulging in Norman's desires, acting on his base impulses for immediate satisfaction. This indulgence finally brings him into contact with Spider-Man. The relationship between the Green Goblin and Spider-Man begins with allusions to how Norman and Peter's relationship first began. It isn't much. The Goblin catches Spider-Man's punch and says, "Impressive." The same thing Norman said to Peter when discussing his science paper. But it was clearly an intentional callback. Norman Goblin continues to be this twisted father figure for Peter's Spider-Man, threatening to lure him down the path of selfish impulse. When the conflict ends, it's made clear to the audience where each of these men stand. Peter is able to save Mary Jane from the Goblin. Then she asks who he is, opening up a big opportunity to score some serious love points. The human spider wouldn't have been able to resist flaunting his power to get the girl, but Peter does not take the opportunity to tell her. He's changed, and to solidify that, when Peter returns to Harry, he declares that someone has to stop the Goblin, implying he's taken on that responsibility. Meanwhile, Norman finally comes to terms with his split personality, and the goal of the Goblin is made clear.
Bringing you what you've always wanted. Power beyond your wildest dreams.
After some hijinks at the Daily Bugle, Spider-Man is hit with knockout gas and goes Betty-bye before waking up on a smoky rooftop to the thematic crossroads of the movie. The Goblin wants to offer Spider-Man a partnership. And at a glance, this scene is a classic, "We're not so different, you and I" speech to set the hero and villain at odds. However, if you look a little closer, Norman really does tempt Peter. The Goblin acknowledges the different paths that he and Spider-Man have taken, but really focuses on the public perception of Spider-Man and whether or not he has a right to better treatment. Goblin begins by asking Spider-Man why he bothers to help people when eventually they'll hate him. Spider-Man responds, "Because it's the right thing." Obviously, the Goblin isn't giving up that easily.
Here's the real truth. There are 8 million people in this city, and those teeming masses exist for the sole purpose of lifting the few exceptional people onto their shoulders. You, me, we're exceptional.
The conflict between them becomes about a choice. Will Peter give in to the temptation of the Goblin, to live a life seeking greater satisfaction for himself, or will he resist and accept the responsibility of his power without reward? It isn't a straightforward decision for Peter. In the next few scenes of the movie, he struggles with the Goblin's offer just in time for everything to go wrong. In classic JJ fashion, he published that Spider-Man and the Goblin are working together, so now parts of the city have turned on Spider-Man and the police want to arrest him. Things have gotten so bad that Spider-Man verbalizes his frustrations to Mary Jane right before their sopping wet MTV award-winning kiss. She tells Spider-Man he's amazing, and he responds that not everyone thinks so. But MJ reinforces her appreciation for his heroic actions. Spider-Man tells her that it's nice to have a fan right before she kisses him. Although it's clear there is some desire to drop the disguise, Peter keeps the mask on, still not wanting to abuse his power to improve his personal life. Mary Jane's simple reinforcement is what Peter needed at this crossroads in the film. Someone encouraging him that he is on the right path, despite public sentiment turning against him. He realizes he doesn't need the massive praise that Goblin seeks. He doesn't want to stand on the shoulders of the masses as an exceptional superhuman. He wants to do the right thing because he can, and damn the consequences. This is explicitly shown when Peter rescues a baby from a burning building. A cop shows up to arrest Spider-Man, but upon the crowd hearing another person in the building, he encourages Spider-Man to get in there and help, like only he can. If even those who aren't Spider-Man's fans can recognize his value in a time of crisis, then Spider-Man is a positive force in the city. Of course, when he goes back into the fire, the Goblin has laid a trap. Spider-Man turns down his offer. He has seen that his actions are appreciated, even if he doesn't get unanimous praise, and knows that that's enough. Norman, naturally, freaks out and tries to kill Spider-Man, shouting in his self-centered way,
No one says no to me!
This section of the story ends with both characters finally at odds. Spider-Man wants to stop the Goblin, and the Goblin wants to destroy Spider-Man. The final act of this movie is all about Norman waging a war on Peter's personal life, while Peter comes to terms with the reality of the decision he's made. But before the showdown at the bridge, the two meet one more time for a nice Thanksgiving dinner. What could go wrong? Norman shows up to Peter and Harry's apartment and is of course a massive creep. Peter is late to this dinner since he just got finished fighting a loon in a goblin suit, so he tries to sneak in, but everyone hears him and goes to check out his room, where we get that iconic blood drip scene. I don't think it's a coincidence that following Spider-Man's rejection of the Goblin, Norman says the first negative thing about Peter he has said in the entire movie.
Bit of a slob, isn't he?
Norman doesn't know Peter's Spider-Man yet, but his ego is so massive that seeing a flaw in Peter opens up his mind to the fact that he may not be a perfect little Norman Jr., which then leads into Norman's suspicion of Peter. Before leaving the Thanksgiving dinner to talk to himself about Spider-Man, we see two glaring examples of how Norman's impulsiveness has impacted his personal life. The first is maybe the creepiest he is in the whole movie. When Norman goes to stick his grubby fingers into the dish that Aunt May put down, she slaps his hand away. He gives her this stare that for some reason has been burned into my memory. You can see in his expression that Norman is really resisting the urge to kill Aunt May right there. Maybe the most restraint we've seen from him since his goblin transformation. The second, much more boisterous display is when Norman is arguing with Harry as he leaves. The argument centers around Mary Jane, where Norman gives Harry the truest to himself advice that he can. He tells Harry to do what he wants with MJ and then dump her, now shifting his life advice from Spider-Man to Harry, encouraging his real son to pursue the same path that he has, chasing desire without care for others. Norman knows Spider-Man is Peter Parker and seeks to make him suffer by going after those he cares about. When he ends up hospitalizing Aunt May, Peter realizes the Goblin knows his secret identity and stays by her bedside, blaming himself for her condition. MJ comes to visit, and the pair get to talking about her breakup with Harry following that charming Thanksgiving dinner. Here, Peter gets as open an invitation to reveal his secret identity as there has been in this movie. You'll notice that throughout this film, Peter is constantly tested both through his superheroics, but also in intimate scenes between himself and MJ. There is an exponential increase in clear benefits he has to gain from revealing his great power to her. Before this scene, there was no guarantee MJ loved Spider-Man. She was just enamored by him while still dating Harry. So Peter revealing himself could have been a good thing, but also could have gone south fast. In this scene, Harry is on the outs, and MJ says it herself that she has a crush on Spider-Man. This is the biggest challenge of Peter's restraint that he has had so far. Do you think if Norman was in this exact situation, he could control himself? Instead, Peter keeps his secret, admitting that Spider-Man is pretty cool, but he goes on to tell Mary Jane what he thinks about her, expressing his feelings for her without flexing his muscles or showing off the spandex. Of course, Harry walks in on their intimate moment and then spills the beans to his father, who immediately acts on this information with zero verification because he's an impulsive maniac, and kidnaps Mary Jane to get to Peter. The Green Goblin presents Spider-Man with a choice. He has a train car full of kids in one hand and Mary Jane in the other, and he drops them all.
We are who we choose to be. Now choose!
Norman is trying to make Peter choose between his personal desires and his responsibility, but I think this is where he fails because he misunderstands the choice he's presenting. Even if Mary Jane was replaced with a random woman, there is no other choice for Spider-Man than his responsibility to do everything in his power to help everyone he can. The only sacrifice he actually makes in this scene is his physical safety, opening himself up for attack. Luckily, his selfless actions for the city are returned by some kind New Yorkers who you don't want to mess with.
You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us!
Goblin naturally pisses his pants because of these gabagoos and flies Spider-Man away for their final confrontation. Having seen Peter's willingness to put everything on the line for the benefit of others, the Goblin says,
Misery, 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 that's what you've chosen.
and we'll get back to that because I think he has a point. From here, the Goblin beats the snot out of Spider-Man, but it's the threat the Goblin makes on Mary Jane's life that gives Peter a second wind to fight back. When the Goblin begins to lose, Norman finally reveals himself to manipulate Peter.
I've been like a father to you. Be a son to me now.
He finally verbalizes the relationship the film has been teasing out, but Peter denies Norman as his father, officially distancing himself from the path of impulse Norman went down and solidifying his commitment to Uncle Ben's lesson about power and responsibility. Upon this denial, Norman attempts to impale Spider-Man from behind, but instead kills himself. Norman did not have to die, but his pursuit of his immediate desires, his inability to stop, led to the rash decision to send his glider hurtling toward his own body. He dies for no other reason than his own choices. But he isn't the only one who suffers for the decisions that he has made. At the end, we see firsthand that the Goblin was right about Peter choosing misery through choosing responsibility. Peter Parker is in a worse place personally than he was at the beginning. He now bears the burden of keeping a dark secret from his best friend, which results in Harry despising Spider-Man. After the woman he loves confesses to loving him back, Peter has to reject her. Through his experience with the Goblin, he understands the danger in his enemies knowing about his loved ones, so he needs to keep MJ at a distance despite his feelings for her. This was Peter's final test. The voiceover at the beginning of the film framed the story around the girl next door, and when that voiceover returns at the end, it again references Peter's relationship to Mary Jane. When she tells him that she loves him, Peter tells the audience,
All I wanted was to tell her how much I loved her. I can't.
He has fully embraced the path of responsibility and the costs that come with it.
This is my gift. My curse. Who am I? I'm Spider-Man.
That's the hero's journey of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. Ultimately, it's a story about the burden of power and the choice to either indulge in that power selfishly and impulsively, or to use it responsibly to benefit others, even if it takes a personal toll.